Okay. Official welcome from Tobin. I think my dad would enjoy that welcome. So grateful to gather with you all to honor my dad's life today. We are going to start actually with a song, and then I'll officially welcome us. We're going to start with the song Come, and the words should be in your program. It's a song dear to our family and many of you in the community. As did my dad, it welcomes all with an open heart, as we do today.
Mom.
Yeah. My first memories... Yeah. You can go in there in a minute. My first memories of singing this song were at the near nightly circles, holding beloved friend Hugh and his family present in so many of my dad's images that you have seen on the walls today. We'll repeat its refrain 3 times. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderers, worshipers, lovers of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come.
Mom.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderers, worshipers, lovers of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come. Come, wherever you are, wanderers, worshipers, lovers of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come.
Mom.
Thank you.
Mom, that's Uncle Steve's picture.
That's Uncle Steve, or Grandpa Steve's button blanket. All right, well, welcome everyone. We'll start by hearing from a few family members and then open it up for sharing. We'll look forward to hearing memories, beloved, humorous, and ever grounded.
Mom.
Yes. Yeah, go. Yeah, go ahead. Tobin will provide the entertainment while I talk. Oh, he's not in yet. All right. You can just tuck yourself in there. Okay, 1 second. Let me help him go back. The disappearing act. All right, well, I'll welcome a few other family members to the stage in a minute. I decided for my sharing today that I would read a letter that I wrote to my dad for his 75th birthday, which, as many of you know, he passed just hours after his 75th, and he had called me about a month prior and told me he was thinking of passing on his 75th birthday. Dear Dad, wow, 75 years. You have now achieved the average lifespan for a white male. This seems like a significant feat given the journey. When I wrote the number, I started thinking of the years in coins as the tooth fairy made another visit last night and didn't have the coins they hoped for. The fairy instead gifted a far more desired, very small, joy-filling knick-knack, and maybe that's what it's all about anyways, right? It's not the counting of the precise number of years or the coins, but the life, joyful and otherwise, that they encompass. I think often with gratitude about how even when we are not able to be in conversation, now and in the future, I will always carry your voice and perspective. When I think about some of the greatest gifts you have shared, I also appreciate that the lessons are enduring. The lessons are enduring, spanning time and presence. 1, when a kid makes a mistake, or really anyone, they will already feel bad about it. If you can meet it with humor, you are likely to gain far more ground for all involved. Like when I parallel parked the truck in the driveway ditch and had to be winched out. Or when the Underwater Services Division of Macintosh Computers had to give me a call following a tea spill into my keyboard. 2, people are complex, but all contain light, and all have a story worth hearing. Whether asking an outspoken community member to share more about why he was in support of Trump, or a man washing windows in Travnik about their journey. 3, don't let age be a limiting factor. Whether wooing mom 9 years your senior, but spry as ever, or riding massive waves on a boogie board alongside surfing teenagers. Okay. 4, through hardship, spirit endures. May we nurture it through. Whether in Bosnia or our own family, you have both documented and committed to bringing healing to both. 5, there's light reflecting everywhere. Sometimes you just have to look for it. 6, maybe most importantly, duct tape can fix almost everything except maybe a broken heart, and even then it might make some ground. I know it is hard to let go of this life, especially one lived so fully, especially in community, but know that your perspective, and as Lila says, your family trait of humor live on. Love you dearly, Laurel. When I was flying up to Lopez the day my dad passed, just before we landed, the stewardess started singing, "I've got sunshine on a cloudy day," and then urged, "Be kind on purpose." Quite aligned with my dad's spirit, may we all seek sunshine on the cloudiest of days, not just for ourselves, but for others who don't have the resources to do so, and for the generations to come. All right.
Let me go in and
Wow. Wow. I just have to take it all in. I am so grateful to Amy Hatchell and Heather Harrison, who made it possible for us to return to Lopez, our dear home, for Steve's last year. For dear friends who visited weekly, for others who popped in from time to time or called, folks who helped him build a small protected garden at Hamlet, and earlier on, folks who built a garden right attached to our home. Skilled healers who gave Steve their care. His bicycle buddies who got him out on his recumbent tricycle, moments when he felt fully alive. Friends who brought special treats, and in earlier stages who brought us incredible meals. The Quaker group and all of you and many others across the country who held us in the light during this journey. I asked Steve how he felt the morning after his joint birthday party with Stanley. His one-word answer, gratitude. Stanley will tell you more. Steve's dear brother, Steve Pedagorsky, arrived 3 days later to celebrate Steve's birthday weekend. As we drove back from the ferry, we got a call from Hamlet House telling us to come immediately. Steve had taken a bad fall. The EMTs recommended he go to the hospital. Steve said a clear no. That day and the next day, he was somewhat subdued, but involved. On Sunday, his 75th birthday, he was more compromised. Laurel had sent a book of tributes and mementos from family and dear friends, and that day was celebrated by reading those special messages. Often, with eyes closed, Steve would acknowledge those gifts to him. About, I said a year before, but I guess it was a month before, Steve had told Laurel he wanted to live until his 75th birthday. He took his last breath a little after 6 o'clock in the morning, the day after his 75th birthday. What a miracle. As a group gathered in a circle that morning to honor his passing, an eagle swooped in, circled around, and flew off. Steve's spirit soared. Steve, I honor your incredible sense of humor through thick and thin, even the groaners. Your deep love of the natural world, your wonderful sense of adventure, hiking and kayaking in the Pacific Northwest, in the East, and other parts of the world. Your creative eye and soul, central to your life, that captured such beauty and sometimes tragedy. Your courage to face personal challenges that turned our life upside down, and your commitment to healing that righted us once again. Following your heart to Bosnia and Kosovo, leading to Pictures Without Borders. Your deep connections with friends, your deep love of family, and delight in Laurel, Tom, Lila, and Tobin that brought so much meaning to your life. Our incredible daughter, Laurel. Your positive attitude, your positive attitude and life spirit as you dealt with the never-ending demands and limitations of your illness. Your amazing end of life. To our deep, abiding love, I miss you.
Many of you know that Steve and I were stepbrothers. His mother had died, my father had died, and I was living in New York City with my mother and my twin brother. Steve was living in Scarsdale with his brother and his father. When my parents got together, I remember the first time we visited the house in Scarsdale, and I saw Steve's room. In one corner of the room was a vast array of equipment that represented Steve's involvement in ham radio. And I took one look at that and I thought, this is super geeky stuff. I mean, here's a guy who is spending an incredible amount of time sitting sometimes with a microphone and sometimes with a Morse code key, trying to communicate with people all over the world. And at that point, which is way, way, way pre-internet, pre-everything, the voices that came over were often really garbled, and they would exchange what were their call numbers. And Steve would say things like, this is WA2 ocean, ocean, ocean. And he'd be speaking to somebody in some island off of Siberia and was terribly excited to have made that connection. And then they would exchange postal addresses and send each other their call cards, which had their WA2000 or whatever their designation was on them. And I realized later that it was this interest that Steve had, which represented interest in technology, in communicating, in gear, was something that probably led him also to his interest in photography. When I think of Steve, I think of his being funny, I think of his being technically oriented, capable, handy, generous, loyal, a number of other adjectives that I think will come to mind for many of you. He was generous in that he let me, once he was interested in photography, watch him work in the darkroom that he had built in the basement of our parents' house in Scarsdale. It was fascinating to me, watching pictures there under the amber light of safe lights come up in the developer tray. And when he went to college, I inherited that darkroom because I was fascinated, thought it was something that I would be interested in as well. And of course, I look back and I think of all the ways in which Steve influenced me, and certainly that, directly or indirectly, was one of the most significant because I have spent the rest of my life since then as a photographer. When I think of Steve's having gone to college and working very hard, traveling while he was there, accomplishing a lot, and then exercising another one of his qualities of loyalty, in that he left shortly after college to come here to be with Stanley when his wife then was ill. At that point, shortly afterwards, Steve basically rejected all of his previous life. Here had been a privileged guy, Phi Beta Kappa at Amherst, everything going for him, who decided for whatever reasons that that was no longer for him. And those of you who have been around here and around him long enough will know that he did a lot of things that were basically back to the earth and manual labor. He was a well digger. He was an electrician's apprentice. He went and worked at a logging camp for a while, and God knows what else. And in that time, this also represented another one of his qualities, which could go either way, which was stubbornness. He stubbornly refused, to the tremendous chagrin of his father, any assistance, financial or otherwise, from home for years. All he wanted to do was to be left alone to enjoy his life here, and it led to a lot of head scratching. I didn't scratch my head that much about it. It just seemed to me as something that he needed to do, and from which he derived a lot of satisfaction. But at the same time, it was immensely satisfying when years later he did come back east for whatever reasons, and I don't even remember exactly why he came back east. But in that time, he met Polly, and they eventually visited Lopez, came back east, and decided to come back here to raise a family, which again was a tremendously joyful thing for all of us, even though for those of us who stayed on the East Coast, it meant that he was going to be on the West Coast once again. But what was also interesting to me was in that time, after he had abandoned photography to be a well digger, an electrician's apprentice, whatever, he decided when he was back here to revisit and rekindle his interest in photography. And that was a time when things in the photographic world had shifted to digital. And it was something with which Steve was not at all familiar. I, however, was, and in a way that was a wonderful sort of rounding of a circle. I got to help him back into photography in a way that was very similar to how he had helped me get into it in the first place. So we had a great time sort of exchanging things, whether it was technical or otherwise, usually over the phone, because even then it was before email was much of a thing, and it was very enduringly pleasing for me that he had gotten back to it and was able to develop a business and a practice of creative photography again. And we can see, and all of you have enjoyed, I'm sure, for years, the fruits of those labors, both creatively and professionally. And it's, of course, part of the legacy that he leaves. But perhaps most influential to me, when I think about Steve and his effect on my life, was what happened as a result of his becoming ill with this disease that was so debilitating, Canvas, an acronym, we don't need to belabor it, you all know what he went through. I, being a born-in-the-woods New Yorker, was someone who, if I imagined what I had had to do or go through in a situation like that, it would not have been what Steve did. And I was amazed all along, and baffled really, that he was able to meet this disease with grace, with humor, with dignity, with patience, not the things that I think would have been there had I been in that situation. And of course, I don't think we ever know how we will behave, what life will be like for us in a situation like that until we're there. But I marveled at Steve's ability to meet it the way that he did. And that's something that I still struggle with, because at first, there was a part of me that felt that he was somewhat passive in his acceptance of it. But as I think about it, with the time that's gone by, I realize that it wouldn't have done any good for him or anyone else to have been too angry, too self-pitying, too anything, any of the things that we might naturally gravitate toward in that situation. But it was not Steve's nature. And I continue to learn about life, about the choices we have that some of you have already alluded to, in how we deal with those situations, in how we deal with other people, and whether the glass for us is half empty or half full. Steve and I were brothers for decades and decades. We loved each other. We could also drive each other crazy. We were very different in many respects. But what was an amazing bit of the end of his life for me was that the day before he died, he said to me in his speech, which was labored, and as you know, which was difficult, he said, "Steve, I want you to know that I love you exactly for who you are." And that was, I think, his way of saying in so many words something that I think most of you who knew him understand. It's a way of saying that despite whatever differences we have, despite whatever difficulties we may face, we have the choice to love, to recognize that family and love are more abiding and more significant and more important than any of these small things about which we may squabble or disagree. So I'm terribly saddened at his death and terribly happy to have been loved by him, to have been influenced by him, and to have shared so much of this life with him. Thank you.
I'm going to wait for Robert to come out and work his magic, but until then, I'm going to stand here. So I'm Sarah, and I'm more recognizable when my twin sister is here because we're Aunt Paul's nieces. Oh, shoot. Ugh. When we first met Steve, I think we were about 8, and we forgave him for bringing Aunt Paul out here quite far away from us, but we loved him dearly. And so in thinking about, you all know Steve in many ways so much more than we did too, because you spent more time with him. But I tried to categorize our feelings about Steve into sort of 3 major points. And the first one was, knowing Steve, was that he seemed capable of doing anything. And he often said that he could do anything. And it wasn't only in preparing what I was going to say that I realized, I think sometimes he didn't, but he told you that he did, and then he would figure it out, which was amazing. But in one of his last visits to us, I remember he came in with his ham radio, and he brought us all, we were dying laughing around the table, and it was so Steve, and it was so perfect. And then my son fell down the stairs and opened his head, and Steve was like, well, I was an EMT, let's take a look. Yep, he needs to go to the hospital. Okay, fine, great. And then my son came back the next day, and he was fine, and he said, I really want to go play squash. And Steve said, I do that too, and he did. And he played with Miles, and he taught him how to play squash. And it was like, well, okay, great, what next? And then we gave Steve a hammer, so he wandered around the house, just like fixing things and putting up shelves, and it was so Steve, and it was perfect. And that was right before he got sick. But he was still Steve. And then I think the second category of things I was thinking about was Steve's incredible capacity to make you feel loved. And I remember at the end of Laurel's wedding, I was sitting on a bench. I think it must have been in front of the resort. And I was so sad to be leaving because all of our family was there from the East Coast, which never happens out here. And it had been such an incredible weekend of family. And I was sitting on the bench, and Steve turned around and he saw me, and his whole face lit up, and he kind of jumped, and he was like, okay, and he came over and sat next to me, and then Aunt Paul turned around and she came over and sat next to me, And I felt his love and their love so strongly, and it just carried me for so long. And I think that ability to just share that love with you is such a gift. And it's something that lives on in, I think, all of our family, and I'm so grateful. And then the third piece, I think, that we all learned from Steve was the ability to give and to ask for help, which so many of us don't have. And Steve's commitment to this community and to one friend after another was so incredible to watch from afar and to learn from how you show up for people in times when they need it and how you get it back when you need it. This community and the way you all care for each other is so incredible to see as an outsider, and to know that Steve was a part of that. It's just so incredible, that gift of knowing when to give help, and also I think the power of being able to ask for it. So thank you for letting us all be a part of it.
Right. Well, my friend, Steve Horn. We first met when we were 6 years old on the playground of our neighborhood Fox Meadow Elementary School in Scarsdale, New York. I can't recall what brought us together that day, though I'm sure much fun was involved. And it was the beginning of our long, deep friendship that we shared for over 70 years. Steve and I each had had the experience of losing a parent at the age of 14. First, my father and then his mother, their deaths happening within months of each other. My father had died suddenly of a heart attack, while Steve's mother had been ill with cancer for a long time. However, her fatal condition was kept secret from Steve by his father, who had wished to protect him from the coming reality of her passing. So our sudden shocks were similar. As adolescents, our separate griefs were too painful to share, and we did not have the guidance or emotional tools to do so. There were some years when we weren't in touch that much, particularly during our college years. In 1971, I came to Lopez with my first wife, Sue Lind, after we graduated from university. Then Sue's 8-month-long illness brought Steve and I together again as he came out from the East Coast to visit us on Lopez. He was such a support and a comfort to me as Sue's illness progressed over the next few months until her death at age 23. So Steve came to visit on Lopez, and then he ended up staying. He first found work assisting Lopez electrician brothers Moki and George Kawani for a while. Then he and Mike Sato worked together digging hand-dug wells for people. They probably were the last to do that kind of ancient well digging on the island. Then he became a logger on the Olympic Peninsula and commuted back and forth from Lopez, doing that dangerous, ancient, accident-prone work. Some harrowing logging stories came out of that experience for sure. After his logging period, he shared my woodworking shop to do carpentry and cabinetry projects for folks on Lopez. Then after Kip and I got married, Steve used his carpentry skills to help me convert the shop into a living space with 2 bedrooms for our daughters, Becca and Jenny. But let's flash forward. As we now see here in this community space and in many others, Steve's love of photography became his true life's work with his unique artistic vision and soulful expression. Growing up in New York, we often celebrated our birthdays together, as I was born on April 16th and he was born on April 21st. This was true for us on Lopez too, so when our birthdays approached last year, Kip, Polly, and I were concerned about Steve's ability to endure a trip in Steve and Polly's van with Steve strapped in his wheelchair to come to our Pavey Hill home for a large event with 30 or so friends attending. we three decided that it would be too much for Steve, given his very compromised condition, so we made an executive decision. And we would simplify and celebrate our birthdays separately. Well, when Steve learned of this plan, he FaceTimed Kip and me and had this to say, quote, "Can we just wipe the slate clean? Look, Stanley and I have celebrated our birthdays together for many years, way before Kip and Polly were even in the picture." So we changed the plan, and Steve arrived in the van and motored along in his powered wheelchair down our path and into our house for our 75th joint birthday celebration. An unforgettable evening. Robert Harrison took timeless photos of Kip, me, Steve, and Polly, and Steve told outrageous stories that made everybody laugh. Then, amazingly, several days later, he passed away peacefully in his sleep in the early morning on April 22nd, the day after his 75th birthday. So, although Steve had a neurodegenerative disease that had taken away much of his ability to walk, swallow, eat, speak clearly, and maintain balance, his memory was still pretty sharp to the end. Our visits outside in the sun, sitting, talking, or sharing moments of silence, bike riding together, and so much more are pure treasures for me. I loved his sense of humor, his deep gratitude for the natural world, his Jewish, Quaker, Buddhist perspective on how to fully live one's life, and his lifelong work in the name of peace. My dear friend, our stories will carry us through to the end. I love you very much, Steve.
All right, hopefully Tobin won't totally feature for the whole day, but we'll see.
Pew pew.
Why not? We know there are
not
many
done.
stories to be told other than potty humor,
I'm not
although
done.
perhaps some of those too. And it's a blessing
I'm
to have
not
this.
done.
Oh, one more.
Finny.
Okay, my grandmother's. Here in spirit, I guess. A blessing to have this time and space to be present to share the stories. As you share, we ask that you try to keep it to a few minutes if possible, although welcome your memories and love and laughter, at whatever they need to be. But if, in case you're somebody who welcomes a visual, as a teacher, I did bring a visual timer that if you know you are someone who might benefit from, you're welcome to set it. You can choose whether you have the sound on or off, but it will give you a flashing light. So we now want to open the floor to hearing from all of you, beloved members of the community, and just so grateful. I forgot my phone, but I want to take a photo to just take in this incredible room of souls. So I'm going to just sneak over there while somebody else makes their way up.
I'm back, but it's not because I want to show off. When Steve was ill, he said to me, "I really want you to meet my dearest friend from college, Bob Elliott. We went to college together, and I just think you'd really enjoy meeting him." So that began, I forget how many, was it a year and a half? We had a weekly phone call, three-way with Bob and Steve and me. And I got to know Bob in a very, profound way. And he couldn't be here today. He lives in Ohio, but he sent me something that he would like me to read to you. So this is Bob Elliott. My friendship with Steve began in the fall of 1967 when we met as new classmates beginning to navigate our ways through college. Steve came from Scarsdale, New York. I had grown up in a small rural conservative community in the real upstate New York, nearer Buffalo than the Bronx. As I met a world of people different than I'd ever known, my eyes grew wide. I remember talking about home cooking and ethnic food with Steve and a bunch of other freshmen, including another small-town country boy who commented, "Bagels and lox? You know, I've never had a lox." I cracked up, and Steve's eyes got wider than mine, and he laughed hysterically. I thought, I'm not alone in this educational experience. We became friends that year, and later roommates, and truly good friends. Steve's genuine open-mindedness and curiosity about everything was remarkable and a delight to share. He also was wise, I think. When I might be bummed out by some misfortune, Steve would be sympathetic but somewhat bemused, as if considering things from a slight distance. It was as if the drama I was enduring was part of a bigger picture that he saw, but I was overlooking. And his observations were not at all patronizing. They were a part of his genuine curiosity about life, and they were always fundamentally affectionate and somehow very reassuring. In the spring of 1970, the college suspended classes in light of the Cambodian bombing chapter of the war in Vietnam. We had both marched in earlier protests, but that spring, the two of us used much of the free time to drive in the country in his green MG and talk about the war and the future. At that time, Steve was in the middle of planning his photography trip to Yugoslavia. I was fascinated by his passionate anticipation of the trip, and in my opinion, the sheer bravery of the project. He was one of a small group of gifted students honored as independent scholars to pursue an academic, scientific, or artistic pursuit of their own creation, freed from routine classwork. Steve used his gifts to make that remarkable and occasionally lonely trip on his own, truly an independent scholar. As I recall, he named that collection of pictures The Spirit of Place. I think that's what it was, which emphasized his distinctive vision and curiosity, both aesthetic and political. Over the years after college, we stayed in touch. Years later, he told me of his return to photograph the people and places of the Balkans following the wars in the 1990s, and the books he intended to publish. I was delighted to be able to give Steve an unexpected helping hand. I had coincidentally been doing some work with Richard Holbrooke, who had been the U.S. ambassador to the UN and a key negotiator of the accords ending the war in Bosnia. When I told him of Steve's work and Pictures Without Borders, Holbrooke was delighted to have the opportunity to add his personal appreciation and recommendation of Steve's unique work. As we stayed in touch, I came to appreciate the community Steve had joined and helped create on Lopez, and I came to know and admire his family more and more. He and Polly visited us in Brooklyn, and we talked from time to time. As he grew ill, we talked more often. He introduced me to Stanley, and the three of us began a weekly phone call that we rarely missed. I visited Steve and his family in the fall of 2022, and my respect and regard for Polly and Laurel grew even more. My memories of Steve are not simply the fond recollections of a friendship and a friend that I treasured. They include an intense appreciation and regard for the love, support, and strength provided by Polly and Laurel as they struggled with the terrible frustrations and sadness of Steve's illness. I'm grateful for Steve's friendship and affection, for his photos, which hang in our house, for my continuing friendship with Stanley, and for the vision of love and endurance his family provided despite the tragic conditions he suffered. Despite his illness, he was a fortunate man.
The ice cream cone. Oh, hey everybody. So I first met Steve through Hugh Lawrence in the late 70s. And Steve had a bushy beard. I think Hugh did too. It was all the rage then, kind of like now. But anyway, I grew up in Eastern Washington, so came to Lopez Island, and here were these very well-educated men. They were always digging damn holes on Lopez Island. And I was like, what is this? You know, what kind of a place have I entered into? These well-educated men choosing to do physical labor. But anyway, Steve and Hugh were both wickedly funny people. So we had a lot of good times together. But, maybe, I don't know, 20 years passed or so, and I got a call from Wayne and Kiki, and they said, Sandy, we had a conversation with Steve, and we'd like to hire you to help Steve publish his book, Pictures Without Borders. And I said, well, why me? I am not a writer, I'm not an editor, I'm not a photographer, I'm not a publisher. I really wouldn't know the first thing. And they said, no, your role is just to be with Steve and make sure this thing manifests. I said, okay, all right then. So when somebody proposes that to me, if I can see the beginning and I can see the end, I think, okay, that's fine. We can fill in, you know, all the middle. But I got to a place with Steve. I was like, how are we going to possibly do this? Because we'd make our plans, we'd get it all laid out, and I'd say, Steve, I'm gonna do these things, you know, got a writer for him. So we'd get it all together, and then we would come back, I'd do the meeting again with him, and he wouldn't have done his part. And I'm like, what? So he had a lot of worry, a lot of consternation, a lot of doubt. Anyway, one day, Carol Steckler, she said, well, how is that going anyway? I said, well, I don't really know. I'm entered, I'm swimming, I'm in this water with Steve that I don't understand. So she, Carol, in her wisdom, she said, I need to read to you from the Talmud. There's some sacred text you need to understand. It is about worry. It is about doubt. It is about consternation. And then I understood, this is just about our process, you know. I am not that way. I mean, right? Just manifesting something. And there was Steve. It was his process. So that is what we had to do. And there we did it together. And the book, you know, was published because Steve is was remarkable artist, photographer, visionary, and all the rest of it. So thank you.
Let me put this back in the thing. Hi. If I were to describe, if I were to describe my Uncle Steve, it would be patient. I have so many memories. To preface, Steve is colorblind, right? I have so many memories of dragging him from room to room in my house going, Uncle Steve, what color is this wall? Uncle Steve, what color is this wall? And you would think it would get old after a year of doing this, but the next year when he visited, I'd do the exact same thing with the same walls. And I think it got to a point where either he memorized the walls or something, I don't know, he just started saying random colors and I thought it was hilarious. But this went on for years. And I remember, my mom touched on it before, when he came to our house with his radio, and it just looked like this walkie-talkie. And I looked at him and I said, what on earth could you possibly be doing with that? And he would sit in our living room for hours just going, can anybody hear me? Is anyone out there? And I looked at him and I said, Steve, you know we have phones, right? But no, trying to get him, he was patient and he was stubborn, but he was patient first. I'm sorry. I was away when he passed, and I didn't know that he passed until a few months after the fact. But I could tell, and I know that people say that, and it sounds crazy, but I knew, and I wrote to my mother, and I said, like, is Steve okay? Like, I feel like something's wrong. And I came back, and I found out that he had passed away. And sorry, I'm really not good at this. He was one of the most loving people I've ever met in my entire life. And I remember in 2020, during COVID, we would all get on a Zoom call. Our entire extended family would get on a Zoom call once a week. And I love him so much, and I don't think he understood how Zoom worked, because he would sit there and, oh my God, he looked so confused. Yeah, I'm not gonna say much more because I'm gonna start stumbling, but I love him and I miss him, and I'm glad that I knew him. That's all.
Well, I don't really think about Steve without thinking about his family. I've known him since the mid-'80s probably, and I have a tradition of writing poetry, and he was always very kind about my poetry, and I also have a tradition of writing raps for Steve. So this is another one. An ode to Steve. We're here to celebrate your life with daughter Laurel, Polly, wife. We bring in grandkids, Tom, and friends. Proclaim your story has no end. For though your lovely body tired, your spirit kept its holy fire, and still it visits us unseen in spirit guides, totems, and dreams. Your sparkling eyes, your vision true, your photographs, how much you knew about the need for truth and grace, about the paths we each must take. All of these and so much more stay with us, an open door reminding that we cannot know what lies beyond or how we'll grow. So much to say in one small rhyme, to chronicle this point in time, to boil it down to one small seed, impossible, and there's no need. Complexity, a word that's true for me whene'er I think of you. I will not say adieu, not me, I'll say I feel you running free.
Well, I know if Steve were around, and perhaps he is, he would have us all out on the street. So I hate to speak in front of such large crowds, but I'm doing this for Steve and wearing my mother's Afghan vest to give me confidence. I do think if Steve, I first got to know Steve as a boss and then as a friend. Steve, Carol, and I first worked for a while together in a tiny, be corrected, tiny office on Dill Road where we had to check with each other before making a move. It was intimate.
Then we moved to a real office in town where Steve built a darkroom and planted flowers and 2 apple trees, his other love. Steve was a Renaissance man. He was an extraordinary person. He saw the big picture and the little tiny details. I'm detail-oriented, but Steve had me beat. As his office manager / computer typist, he'd remind me that the word judgment has an E in it. He was colorblind, as you've all heard, and so he relied on Carol for all the color correcting. He loved black and white photography, as you can see by all the pictures on the walls, and delighted in the magic as a picture develops in the darkroom. He really resisted digital photography until he was forced to make the switch, and slowly the darkroom became a storage room, as many have eventually had to move everything out of that office. Early on, I found out that Steve was in former Yugoslavia taking pictures of people and landscapes. At the same time, I was living in Turkey with my family around 69, 70. Many years later, he dreamt of going back there and documenting the changes after the war, which he did, and then shared in that beautiful book, Pictures Without Borders. We shared many of life's challenges over the years, some tears and some laughter. He faced tough personal issues with courage, amazing courage. He definitely loved a good joke and was an amazing storyteller, and I was often the gullible one in the office. He had a photo that hung on the wall, and I think it is out there, that he tortured Carol and myself with not telling us who was in the picture. We also bossed Steve around, and he graciously accepted it. And when blood sugars ran low, there was always tea. We worked as a team, trying to balance the desires of clients with the capturing the moment style rather than the traditional staging the photograph style. Steve had a special ability to take pictures but not intrude on the scene, a gentle, unimposing presence when photographing a wedding. Steve was incredibly generous. His employee health care plan included a good lunch from Vortex or Vitas, as well as allowing me to leave early for kids' sporting events and allowing Carol to have a week off before and after the fiddle festivals. He also treated us to stays in B&Bs off island. As a friend, we shared meals, gardening parties, birthdays. He even got up at 3:30 a.m. to see the sunrise from the top of Chadwick on my June birthday. Although many of you know he might have already been awake at that hour. We said goodbye to our old dogs together, went biking. Steve had determination. And on family skiing trips. He loved to go to the mountains and was a good guide down the slopes of Stevens Pass for Laurel, Peter, and myself. Steve documented so many Lopez events. He often had a camera hanging around his neck, or later a cell phone capturing the times of our lives. I don't know many Yiddish words, but I know one. Steve was what you call a mensch in Yiddish, a person with the qualities qualities one would hope for a friend and a colleague. He was thoughtful, kind, and a person of integrity and honor. Thank you.
This is audience participation. Just say it. Steve Horn. Steve Horn. Again, Steve Horn. Steve Horn. With music, Steve Horn. Steve Horn. Steve Horn. Steve Horn. Steve Horn. Way to pack him in, Steve. What an amazing photographer. This is like, it's so amazing to see these photos. Anyway, that's not what I came to speak about. I wrote this down, and I'll try not to go over my time, but I might. I call this Steve's various vehicles. But as Molly Bill would say, you should say Steve's modes of transportation. He had a lot of them. Anyway, just to give you a little context, I have known Steve Horn for a really long time, and since he fell off the back of that truck right over here, I became a sounding board for him, a sharing person, a listener. What else was I? We just shared loss, and every Monday, Eric Hall and I would meet with Steve for about an hour, and this went on for years. And we just shared stuff that was, important and personal. One might expect, and I was talking to Eric this morning about that, one might expect with this kind of illness, you might have a tendency to withdraw, to pull back. Steve did not do that. He expanded his circle. He expanded it to the East Coast. He went to meditation groups on the East Coast at 4 a.m. in the morning. You know, he had ALS groups. He had people coming to visit with him many times a week. He got bigger. He didn't withdraw. He got bigger. He liked conversation. He liked input. And as many of you know, Steve could really talk. And talk. And sometimes you wanted to get the hook out and say, that's it, Steve. He was a seeker. He was seeking answers to his dilemma. And his whole life was a seeker. But anyway, in this particular mode that I spent with him, and during this disease, he was really seeking and working on that and meditating and reading stuff, and positivity and gratitude were key words for him. And I think the reason he did that was because he thought he could beat that disease. And he thought that if he was dark and angry about it and upset about it, then that would indicate that he had given up and he would be defeated. So one of his reasons for trying to hold that positivity was he was going to beat this disease. Eric and I were going, well, maybe. So we talked life and death and quality of life and where that line was. It's an important line. You watch someone just in decline, and what is the quality of the life, and then what to do if you cross that line. Those are the hard questions. We did hard questions, and that was good. And he told us stories, and that was fun, and we went on adventures. Steve, he liked gadgets. We all know Steve is a tech guy, and his brother alluded to it. I mean, he's like a tech guy from 6 years old. He's got ham radios and stuff like that, and he could understand your phone before you could even turn it on. And anyway, in the end, he had things to help him breathe and to help him sleep and to help him spit, for crying out loud. So he spending time with Steve in this condition, it's this grinding deterioration, and particularly of mobility. What I noticed in these kind of neurodegenerative things is that me? No, okay. It's you. Turn your phone on. Anyway, the loss of mobility and independence, I think, is everything to these people. And especially when your mind is really intact, and his intellect was full on and fully conscious and thoughtful and all those things that our minds do, and he was good at that. But Steve was a goer, and sometimes he wanted to go spontaneously. He just wanted to do stuff and go. And so and here's the part of the story that I started with. He had various walkers, right? I don't know if anybody had ever been to his house. He had lots of walkers. Well, and of course the plain old walker that you just use and walk around with, that was in the corner, kind of useless. And then he had this all-terrain tricycle walker that he used outside. It was a little too big for inside, but I think I did see it inside a couple of times. He had a plain wheelchair. Who would want a plain wheelchair? That was also in the corner with the walker. He had an all-terrain power chair. And early on, this was the love of his life. And of course, he had the Big Daddy. I don't know if you ever saw the big one. I mean, they didn't call it the Big Daddy, but I thought it was the Big Daddy. It was this huge thing, and it could go up and down and sideways and support his neck, and that's kind of what he needed. The learning curve driving these things was pretty steep. It's joystick stuff, you know. It's like, and some of us who grew up with steering wheels are not used to joysticks yet, so the Holly Lane house took a beating. Yeah, it's the baseboard, it's the door trim, it's the sheetrock, it's just stuff, you know. It's like, it's just stuff. So he liked the all-terrain power chair. You know, like I say, it was one of his favorites early on. And so in all-terrain, I think that the people who make these things means graded gravel path. Not pavement, graded gravel path. Well, that's not what Steve had in mind when they said all-terrain. And so I don't know if you've been to their house, but their parking lot up to Cherry Tree Lane is kind of a little steep path. Well, not even a path. It's like it's a rutty thing. And so we got this thing going up the hill, and he really wanted to get up to Cherry Tree via the back way. And so there are rocks and roots and sticks across, and there was pushing and shoving and swearing and all that stuff. We got to Cherry Tree. Cherry Tree is this wide open, traffic-free gravel, that's where the graded gravel is. It's a beautiful road to kind of explore with a power chair. Anyway, you know, Steve, sometimes he would remind me, and when he'd be on these vehicles, he reminded me of Toad in The Wind in the Willows in the motor car. He'd get this look in his eyes and this silly grin on his face, and you think, what's going to happen now? And it was that devil may care. It's an old expression, devil may care feeling. It also includes a bit of recklessness. You know, he could be reckless. Eric and I, this is one of our Mondays, we went on a trip with Steve to the Hummel Lake Preserve, not very far away from Holly Lane, but it includes Center Road. And Center Road is a dangerous road for anybody, even for cars it's a dangerous road. And they live right on this hill, steep hill, and people are just putting the pedal to the metal and coming up the hill. And there's no shoulders, nothing. And so he decides, we've got to go downhill a little bit to get across to the Humboldt Lake Preserve. And so he decides to go on the pedestrian, what I think of as the pedestrian side, the left-hand side. And I thought, this is nuts. He's a motor vehicle. He should be on the right-hand side. But I think Steve figured if he had to head into the ditch, he could. If someone approached him too aggressively, he could just yank it over and go into the ditch. Well, it didn't happen, and we made it to Humboldt Lake Preserve. And it was all very nice, a nice little trip, and it's a beautiful little spot over there, and it's easy going with the all-terrain thing, because pretty nice ground, and then there's a little path that goes down to the dock at the lake. It's a little on the steep side, but anyway, it's pretty good, it's pretty good. They maintain that pretty well, and so we went to the dock, and that was all very nice. I don't know, were there birds on the lake? I don't know. So more chit-chat, and then we decided we had to go back. And so we're going up this hill, and I don't know what season it was, but it was a little wet and greasy. And so we're heading up the hill, and Steve, for some reason, kind of got off the worn path, kind of got on the side. And I'm thinking, oh, shit. And he may have done this on purpose. We don't know, because he was that kind of guy. He would do something like this on purpose, and pretty soon the tires were spinning on the all-terrain vehicle that really is used to gravel paths. And so I tell my kids, when your tires start spinning, it's time to stop. Steve never learned that lesson. Never. And he just dug himself in with this power chair, and I thought, oh man, what a mess. This thing is heavy. And so Eric and I are there, and we're walking, of course, and Steve is on his machine. Well, it turned out, because Steve really wanted to be independent, he had created this self-rescue kit. Brother. Do you remember it, Polly? He had this... He had this bag, and it had a piece of rope in it, and maybe a come-along, and some straps. He had some straps and come-along, and a little bag of gravel to help out. We put kitty litter in our car in case we get stuck, but anyway, he had a little bag of gravel to help him get unstuck. And I was talking to Eric this morning, and I said, did we help him? Should we have just left him there? We couldn't decide. Anyway, he got out his straps and his rope and probably his bag of gravel and attempted to self-rescue. And this was a little early on. He could still walk or crawl. He could have gotten to the nearest tree and put a strap around it and his rope and come along and yanked that thing out. And he would have done it. Anyway, we got out. I say we because neither one of us are sure, or Eric and I, and maybe Steve remembers, but not so much now. And so we got out, and we realized that, of course, you need to have a cell phone at all times, Steve, everywhere you go, because he wanted to go places. And that turned this simple little, trip to Humboldt Lake, a little Monday morning kind of thing, a little chatter and nice thing, into this grand adventure. We were covered with mud. The power chair was a wreck. I mean, it was just like, so it was grand. Which page am I on? It's almost over. Steve would arrive at events. I remember at least a couple of them. He would come boiling in on his power chair. Polly was nowhere in sight, which meant, and it wasn't that far. I remember one time he showed up at Easter at David Bill's on his power chair, and then another time here in the village. It just means navigating Center Road and Humboldt Lake Road to get down here. But he would just come boiling into these events, and I thought, wow. And this is what he loved. He liked showing up, and he liked the adventure of it, and he did not want to be deterred, even though he could barely walk. He was going, and he wanted to have some fun. He used to garden with a walker. There's a little garden by their house. He became an avid gardener. He would garden there. He would garden from his wheelchair. And he took many trips on his powered tricycle, and I'm hoping that Gretchen or Bruce, I don't see them, but maybe they are here, may get up and speak to those, because they were amazing trips all around the village. The last trip I took with Steve was with his walker and a gate belt. I was holding on to his gate belt, and he was slowly walking around the Hamlet house inside. I like to remember that gleam, that kind of gleam in his eye, that grin, that hair, wind in his hair kind of thing moving. Thank you.
Nancy and I were standing behind the curtain, and we couldn't decide, oops, can I just hold it this way? Oh, that's probably easier. Okay. We couldn't decide who should come after Stephen. So we came together. One of the things I'm really appreciating, I think we've all covered different aspects of Steve's life. I'm going back in time a little bit. And I wrote mine. Nancy has lots of notes. Okay. I first met Steve at Stanley's house when I brought my daughter Becca over for a guitar lesson from Stanley. Stanley was a fireman and then got an alarm call and had to rush off. Steve was in Stanley's woodworking shop building a door for Len Kanzer's house and came running out to the driveway where Becca and I were standing. We knew a front door was being built and that the job was taking a long time, but we didn't know it was Steve Horn who was building the door for Len Kanzer's house. Steve told me in the driveway that he was Stanley's oldest and dearest friend from Scarsdale, New York, and he frequently worked in Stanley's shop. I had recently moved from Nova Scotia to Lopez with my daughters and was working at the Lopez Library at that time with Sandra Shugren. A few weeks later, I came home from work about 5:30 or 6, and Steve Horn just arrived when I came home with a new door. That was before I understood anything about Lopez time. It was a beautiful door. It took my breath away, and I made dinner while he hung it. We ended up inviting Steve to join us for a meal together. Polly was on the East Coast, tending to her very ill sister. This was the beginning of a very long friendship with Steve and Polly. After Polly's sister died, she returned to Lopez and soon became pregnant with Laurel. I had moved with my daughters to Rudy Rubseman's on Cross Road and lived in the upstairs apartment of his old farmhouse. The downstairs apartment became available, and Polly and Steve moved into it. Very soon, the four of us became the upstairs-downstairs friends, along with Becca and Jenny and our dog, Sari. And there are many photographs presented throughout the show today that come from that era. We had dinner once a week with each other and were side by side when Polly gave birth to Laurel in March. Frequently, Sari and Laurel would cry in the night, and Polly worried that Laurel had woken up Sari, and we worried that Sari had woken up Laurel. So that was quite a time. But our friendship turned to a much deeper level when both of our families experienced trauma. I think of Joseph Campbell's A Hero with a Thousand Faces, and Steve became my hero in how he faced a hard truth in himself and made sacrifices for his beloved family. It took a kind of courage I've rarely known, a courage that helped me believe in the goodness of human nature. I think back to that beautiful door Steve made for Len Kanzer's house. That door that took a long time to build and arrived unexpectedly. Steve opened that door of courage in my heart to believe in the power of healing. I love you, Steve, Polly, and Laurel.
Kip's going to hold my hand. I did write a lot of things, but I'm not going to read them because I just have spent a lot of time this week just going through the movie of my friend Steve and our long 35-year friendship. And a lot happens in 35 years. And I began to know Steve well during a very dark time in his life, and our friendship continued over all of those years through many, many wonderful events, as has been spoken today, the courage that I saw in Steve to really, his determination, his utter, that determination could drive anybody crazy, but it also worked that he was so determined not to lose himself. He did not run. Steve did not run from himself, and he didn't really run from anything. He really ran towards a lot in his life. And I do want to talk about a sense of humor, but the running towards became really significant in my life when my husband was diagnosed with a glioblastoma, and Steve was one of the first people who Greg called. And Steve had endured the loss of his very, very dear friend, Hugh Lawrence, as most people know, only 10 years before, to the same brain tumor. So Steve knew what he was entering into, but he did not run from it. He ran towards it. And Steve, in combination with Polly and some other beloved people from our Quaker meeting, really held us together. And there's so many times I think of the wisdom that Steve shared, some of which from his own experience of having lost a parent, so he could really speak and push me, I will say me specifically, but both of us, to become to our children and to sort of enable our children to enter into the loss of a parent in a way that he did not get himself. And those times were really valuable. So I really honor him for that. And then he stood by me. Steve was really such an important friend to me during the time that Greg was dying and after he died. And I think that there are, speaking of Gregs, here comes the youngest Greg, right in the back door. But there are people in a situation where somebody's experiencing trauma. There are people who come in and they're firefighters, and there are people who also stay and are builders. And Steve, for me, was a builder. He really stuck with me through those dark years. And once again, we shared a darkness that I experienced, and he was always there. He was always there. And it has, it's meant so much to me in my life. Now, I really have there's just these snippets. But one thing that has not been discussed is not only did Steve have a vision that he used in photography, but he had a vision of how things should be. One of which was how the world should be, how we should treat each other as people. And he really hung on to that his whole life. But he also had a vision for a few other things. Unfortunately, there were only 2 members of the Hummel Lake Mobile Home Society. And I mean, why there weren't more, I don't know. But We did have 2 members, but Steve, he not only just had one, he had to get another mobile home. I don't know if you know anybody who has made an addition to their mobile home. That was Steve. So he really always kind of saw beyond. He also, in another way, he wasn't able, he wasn't able to let things go. And that could definitely work against him. I remember going through that bedroom of papers, and there was like a menu for the Bay Cafe now I guess it's an artifact, so it's important. But at the time, it was like, do you really need this? But but he also, if he had an idea, he also followed through on it. And after Greg died, I was exhausted after, only 2 years, not to mention the 5 that Steve lived with. But we were going to have a memorial. We were trying to figure out where to do it. The only option we could think of was inside. We were just about to make that happen. And Emma doesn't remember this, but I remember it so vividly, and Emma just said, we cannot do it inside. It has to be outside. And I was just like, oh, God. And Steve said, we're going to do that. We're going to make it happen. And he did. And we had the most beautiful memorial in a beautiful location, and we couldn't have asked for more. And if it hadn't been for Steve, really, that really wouldn't have happened. His vision worked in a lot of ways, and his inability to let go of things also worked in some good ways. And he never gave up on friends. Steve didn't give up on himself, but he also didn't give up on anyone else. And he really stuck with people in a way that I just don't know if many do. He just had so much courage and so much determination to become who he wanted to be and to expect the people he loved to become who they could be. And he was quite a mentor to me in documenting and chronicling our family experience, and he just pushed me. He would not let me give up on that. He also was such a mentor to Greg and enabled Greg to really fulfill his dream in his last years with his photography. So the 2 of them did a beautiful project together, and it meant the world. It meant the world to Greg. I want to just speak to one more thing. I did want to talk about the hula dance at the ferry too. Steve I don't think he had that embarrassment gene, really. I have a picture of it, and let me tell you, it is not pretty. But he did it. But I also want to speak to, so I have to speak to this. His travels. So Steve and I we really shared a love for being a part of, trying to understand a part of cultures that were really different from our own. And obviously we know his beautiful work in Bosnia. He always supported me in my travels. And Clara and I, as a result of the gift of Steve and his generosity and his faithfulness to his friends, we were able to connect with his friends in Bosnia when we went to Bosnia. So we went to Bosnia, and we were able to stay with Steve's friends and spend several days, and we were treated like royalty because of Steve. And it was just such a gift. It was such a gift to us, and such a gift to be able to just get a little glimpse of the world that he so loved and really chronicled and documented. But then a few years later, I went with Clara to Turkey, and we were in an area that now has become a really touristy, but at the time that Steve was there in 1970, it was definitely not touristy. And so he emails me these pictures, and he said, can you find these people? I'm like, all right, okay, how am I going to do this? okay, Steve, I'll do what I can. And you know, Steve, he was like, you got to do this. You got to do this. He even sent me, I found last night on the internet, he sent me these Turkish phrases. He said, use these phrases and people will really like you. But we had a tour guide for the day, and so I said to him, he was about 40-ish, so he wouldn't have been alive when Steve was there, but his family, he was a third or fourth generation from this area, so I showed him the pictures, and I said, is there any chance, you know, that you know any of these people? And oh, it was so beautiful. His face he was just floored with particularly this one picture of this very old man at the time the picture was taken. And it was so profound. He looked at it and he said, no one will ever see this again. Like, he really was so moved to see this picture and it was such a treasure to him. And then he took the other pictures and he put them on this Facebook group, and he was so thrilled. And I realized, you know, this is just a little inkling of what Steve experienced when he went back in 2003, and just the joy and the meaning that other people derived from Steve's gift to really want to connect and understand their world. And it was an honor of mine, for sure, to be able just to get a little glimpse of that. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is I do want to say something about Steve and the work of dying, because it was very hard work. And I think dying is very hard work. I know dying is hard work for many. And Steve called me at, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before he died. And he said, I want you to come over and I want to talk to you. And he wanted to talk to me about dying. And he wanted to talk to me about he really wanted to talk about what Greg's experience of dying was and how I perceived that, but he really wanted to talk about dying. And this was a time where, you know, you got about 5 minutes, and he was like, I can't talk anymore, I'm too tired. And I kept saying, Steve, you've talked, no, you need to stay. And we stayed. I was probably there for 30 minutes at least, and really delved into dying, life after death, what it means. Just, he really, really wanted to talk about what it means, and he really was, in his way, so curious and so passionate about just trying to get it and understand something and know that he was going there, and he just really was working hard on that. And there was something in the room that day that I don't think I've really ever experienced before or since. And I walked away knowing I wouldn't see him again, and feeling such a sense of satisfaction of really the way that Steve could share the smallest things, the deepest things, the most meaningful parts of life. And he was a gift. I'm going to hand it off. I can't get it back.
Hi there, my name is Hank, and I have been feeling called here in order to talk about Steve's triking days. And my wife and I, Judith Ames, we were up here one time visiting with the family, and Steve said, you guys want to go for a bike ride? I go, well, yeah, but it seems a little difficult for you. And he was in a wheelchair, I believe, at the time. He says, well, there's a friend of mine that has a trike, and we can drive there, and I can pedal the trike. It's like, you can pedal the trike? You can barely walk, but let's try it. So we got him into the van, and we went out there and got the trike out, and Steve it didn't have a motor on it at the time. And we went around Sperry Spit, or whatever the spit is around here, and he did pretty well at it. We went probably about 3 or 4 miles, and he was able to kind of move his feet. And on the way back, it was a really brisk headwind, and it was like pretty hard for us to get back. But we got back, and on the way back, I go, there's a motorized hub on the back of this, and it's like, where's the battery? And he goes, oh, the battery's gone for a long time. And he goes, why don't, I said, why don't we get a battery for it? He goes, why would I need a battery? And I said, this whole island could be yours then. You could just like bike around and visit people. So we managed to get a battery hooked up to this thing. And Steve, it just became this beautiful experience of freedom for him. And I came back after we got the battery in there, and we went I said, where do you want to go for a bike ride? He goes, well, how about Sperry Spit? And it's like, well, that's 7 miles away or something like that. But let's go. So Steve went cruising down there, and we found this back trail down to Sperry Spit, and we went all the way down this trail, which was not really a bike trail, it was a walking trail, and went out to the end of the spit and watched the sun go down or something like that. It was really beautiful. And I had to push him back up that hill because his wheel was spinning. And then there's another time where we're biking around the triangle up here, and you go up a hill and then you go down, and we like, well, it's a pretty steep hill, that was fun. And then a few months later came back and we did it again, but Steve was in a condition where it's like, well, you probably don't want to go down this hill. And he kind of looks at it and he goes, oh yeah, come on. And he goes flying down the hill. I go, Steve, slow down, slow down, slow down. But he wouldn't. And then as time went on, it seems like there was another time I wanted to talk about, but as time went on, he said, oh, I know, spandex isn't exactly something a lot of people had on bicycles around here, but it seems like Steve almost wore spandex because he looked like a really cool biker all the time. He had these sunglasses on and his helmet, and he just looked like, I am a really fast and capable bike rider. And we would go down to the market when it was happening. He'd just like zip from stall to stall, and people would come out and visit with him and talk, and he goes, okay, I gotta go, and then he'd go zipping off. And this is when he couldn't walk anymore. And one time he invited me back again, or we got together again. He said he wanted to go out on his trike. I said, you still go out on your trike? How do you? He goes, I do it every chance I get. And he was wheelchair bound. He couldn't walk. How do we even get him into the trike? When I came, he said, you know, I don't know if I can get out on the trike today. I mean, breathlessly he was saying this. And it's like, okay, that's fine. And he said, let's just take a walk. And it took probably about 45 minutes to get him into his wheelchair and get him outside and get some sort of a walker where he could try walking just around a parking lot, a really tiny parking lot over at the Manor. And it was slow going. He was just like taking constant breaths, and we're holding him up, and he goes, no, okay, I'm ready to go again. And then we took a break, and we're sitting down for a while, and I would think I was trying to bring a little levity in the situation and probably tried to crack a joke or something. And he said, you don't understand, Hank. Every breath that I'm taking, I have to concentrate on right now. And I just really felt the courage in him to carry on and to face what he was up against. I just realized that he knew what he was going through. I mean, he obviously knew what he was going through, but I guess the courage in order for him to be there and to be with that and to be able to express it to me was a real teaching for me. And I guess I really have a lot of gratitude for being able to spend time with him during his last year or so of life on that level, being one of his trike companions, of which he had many. So, thank you.
Friends, my name's John Holding, and I'm here with Iris Scrivell. And we are the co-clerks of the Lopez Island Friends meeting. Our meeting has asked us to read a statement to you all on this occasion, Steve being a beloved and dear, devoted member of our community. Before we read, we'll read the statement out of the silence, which is a Quaker tradition. And when we're finished, we'll step back into the silence. Steve was a lover of the silence. And I know we know the many stories he loved to tell and so forth, but the deep way in which he could settle into the silence was quite profound. We have a new Quaker meeting house at Sunnyfield Farm, and we wanted to make sure that Steve had a chance to experience it. It was near the end of his life here on this earth. And so we made sure to build a ramp that he could come up on because we wanted to make sure that he could get himself into the meeting house. And when we got it done and he had come back from California, he tried the ramp out for us. He was the first one to do it. And he kind of came around the corner on a gravel path. I don't know if it was the Beast or which particular vehicle it was, but he came zooming up that path, and he came around the corner and went zooming up the ramp and up onto the platform up at the door. And he just had this smile, and he says, "You want me to do it again?" And he comes zipping back down. And I was down at the bottom, and I'm just kind of like looking at the walls and so forth. And I said, "Yeah, do it again, Steve. Just be careful." And he looked at me, and he got that wry smile that we all know. And he goes, "Oh, right, I need to be careful. I don't want to kill myself." And he went zipping back up the ramp and into the meeting house. So, friends, let's settle into some silence here, if we could. And then we'll read this statement from his Quaker meeting. Steve Horn was a member of the Lopez Island Friends meeting of the Religious Society of Friends. Steve and wife Polly were early participants of the Lopez Island Quaker worship group in the 1990s. Over the next 3 decades, Steve had service as co-clerk of the meeting, as well as on a number of committees. In his application for membership, Steve shared that his Lopez Quaker community's ecumenical nature resonated well with his mix of Buddhist spiritual practices, Quaker practices, and his life journey as a person of Jewish ethnicity. Steve's service to his Lopez community and beyond was a perfect model of 17th century Quaker and founder George Fox's encouragement to walk cheerfully over the world, answering that of God in every person. We are deeply grateful to have been blessed by Steve's presence and faithfulness, and we will so very miss the cheer that he brought to us and to the lives of so many.
I'm now representing 2 friends from the East. The first was a dear friend, Jerry Bell. My friend Steve Horn was a fellow seeker who I was lucky enough to spend time with time with this time around. My life is a richer one because of our meeting. Steve and I first encountered one another in the fall of 1977. We lived across the hall from each other in a group house in Allston, Mass. We had both recently moved to the area. We interviewed and were accepted into the house. We soon discovered we both came from loving, overbearing Jewish families. Over time, our friendship grew. I was drawn to the way Steve was able to see and capture beauty, his deep curiosity, and his adventurous spirit. Having encountered many homeless people near where he worked on the South End, one night Steve stayed out all night, seeking places where those without homes were, hoping to gain some understanding of their experience. Steve was an explorer of both inner and outer worlds. He brought introspection, humor, insight, and determination to all he did, and he brought these traits to those of us lucky enough to be in his orbit. He embraced the world as he saw it, and this was not always an easy road. Steve and I worked together on a national action in Washington, D.C., the spring of 1980. It was a coalition of labor, environmental, political, and religious groups calling on our desire for a non-nuclear world. I had known about Steve's drive and determination and had bumped into his stubbornness and tenacity on more than one occasion. But working together on this project, I witnessed these traits in a whole different, other intensity level. To transport demonstrators from Boston to DC, someone in our group had decided to rent several cars on the Amtrak train. Steve and I went to talk with the Amtrak people, and they wouldn't agree unless we left a deposit. We had no access to the kind of money they required. Undeterred, Steve offered to put his land on Lopez as collateral. The priest train filled, a song was written about said train by a local folk singer, and many came to Washington that day filled with hope, and Steve held on to his land. Steve met his beloved Polly, married, and returned to his dear island. We stayed in touch over the years, sharing our individual journeys with each other. I always left these meetings with new insights into the world and myself. It was the same for the last journey Steve took. From his diagnosis to his last breath, Steve engaged life with his whole being. This was not an easy row to hoe, but there he was. Steve sought out and gained the tools he needed to be present through it all. Because of his writings, many of us here today got to glimpse the pain, curiosity, and love he brought to this, his last journey. I love you, Steve. I thank you for all you are and for the gifts of being and seeing you generously gave me. That was from Jerry Bell. And this one is from Phyllis Breatholtz, who is a friend of mine in Cambridge. Since photography was such a huge part of Steve's life, I began my thoughts with Steve's own words. When I am behind a camera, life takes on a certain freshness for me. My senses come alive. I carry the hope that my work has meaning for others, that people are touched by some common element that ties us all together. This sense of meaning comes alive in so many of Steve's photographs, but perhaps none more so than the pictures he took in Bosnia. Not only did he capture life in the village, he captured the faces of people he met. True to Steve's desire for his work to have meaning for others, those images became the touchstones, the living anchors for those people, because he made that enormous effort to revisit the people who had lost so much as a result of war. He made that connection that ties us all together, the human connection. As Steve became less mobile, he was able to connect with so many through his writings in Caringbridge. He traveled his very challenging journey with so much dignity. He was able to find poetry and humor in the simplest things in life. Through his writing, he was able to express those deeply human connections. He was an inspiration for how to live life to the fullest. And for that, I am grateful and most appreciative to have known Steve, the truly remarkable Steve Horn, whose life force and spirit live on. With love always, Phyllis.
Just invite if anybody else would like to share before we do. We have a beautiful closing song. My husband, Tom Elgin, wrote a contribution for my dad's celebration of life. Steve, there once was a man from Scarsdale who delivered himself through the train mail. He ran off to an island. His bad jokes kept him smiling, even when age left him needing a handrail. Steve was my girlfriend's dad, then my father-in-law. He was my engagement photographer, my wood splitter instructor, and my lawnmower belt-changing mentor. Steve was my gluten-free buddy, my bad joke buddy, and later my disability buddy. I miss him. Love, Tom.
We're going to sing a song that some of you may know, and if you do, please join us. It's called We Shall Be Known. And as we were listening, the first line of that song is, we shall be known by the company we keep. And wow, some beautiful company. So, let's use this.
And thanks to Ma Muse for this song.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now, it is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now, it is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now, it is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love.
I just want to say how grateful I am for a wonderful sharing. You fill my heart. Thank you.
I'll share that gratitude. And also, you may have seen as you came in that there was a compost offering, which, if you didn't know, my dad chose to be teramated. And he encourages you all to do that. I will never forget the email that I got, and it just said FYI. That was the subject line. No body, no nothing, just FYI. And it was the confirmation that he had prepaid to be teramated. So I was informed that that was the future. And we got to throw in some extra things when he went into his vessel, and so some duckweed and some dark chocolate and Lopez sand. So we think it's going to be extra rich. And you're invited to take a small bag back to your garden, but also tomorrow he will be the first one to join what he called a low spot, not to be confused with a low point, in the Lopez Cemetery, where he and future teramated contributions can join. And so we're going to do that tomorrow at 1 p.m., and we'll have shovels big and small, and anyone is welcome to join us as we do that. But please take a bag home to your garden. And then I hope you also saw, as many shared, my dad treasured many things, junk and otherwise, precious. And so you're invited to take a book from the Steve Horn Library that you can treasure, and then if you find that you want to pass it on to the Lopez Library for their sale, you can do that. But please take it off my hands. And maybe take a few extra for some friends. I don't know. Presents for the next few years. And I'm very sorry that we don't have enough duct tape to hand out to everyone, but we do hope that you take an expired credit card and, like my dad, in his honor, maybe not a credit card, but something else, wrap it in duct tape. He always had it. I now carry his duct tape card, along with his Divine Light meditation that he kept on card size in his wallet, just in case of emergency. And then we invite you now you can spend some more time exploring the exhibits. Unfortunately, we do have to take these images down, and we'll put the video back up. Some of you may have seen it as you came in. It was over the last 5 years that my dad started pulling these images with me, and about 2 years ago with Lila and Tobin started telling their stories. And so I have like 82 minutes unedited of him just telling the stories. Every single one of these photos that's on the wall was one that he touched and told a story about to me, Lila and Tobin. I think I edited out the nursing photos that happened during that time. But really appreciate your presence here today, appreciate your presence in our lives, and just lots of gratitude and love as he would share.